Hi, this is the second part of the test selection video presentations. So now we are going to talk about cultural and linguistic features. One important concept is that a translation never ensures that the psychometric properties from the English version will be automatically carried over to the other language. In addition, a translation does not ensure that the cultural and linguistic characteristics are appropriate to use with any given L1 population, that is, with any given population that speaks another language. This means that in the cases in which we have a translation of an English measure that was previously developed, we need to make some evaluation of the translation. We need to ask ourselves this question: is the translation adequate? Usually in the manual there will be some information about the steps that the designers took in order to complete a good translation. For example, they may say that they obtained input from a panel of experts, of content experts, that is, of people who know about what should be included in the test. Also, for translations, a very frequently recommended procedure is the translation and back translation. What is that? The developers of the English measure will, let's say, translate the measure into Spanish, and then a Spanish-English bilingual translator will translate it back to English. After that, there is a comparison between the original English version and the back translated version to make sure that the concepts were equivalent, to make sure that the Spanish version actually has the same content than the English version. This is commonly done for questionnaires, case history, for example, surveys about what parents think about their children, things like that. Also, in the manual, the developers of the test may talk about how much they learned about other, let's say, curricula or development and assessments in the other language from countries that actually speak that other language. Another important thing to consider when we look at translations is whether the standardization of the measure was completed with the appropriate other language speaking population. And there are some statistical techniques that assure us that a test is well developed, and one statistical technique is called differential item functioning. This is just for your information. So what are some of the specifics about cultural and linguistic appropriateness? When we have a test in two languages, we want to make sure that there is content equivalence of the items and of the measure as a whole. In terms of culture, we want to make sure that the domains and the questions are relevant to the population. For example, some tests about cognition may ask questions related to winter and snowstorms and certain topics that may not be relevant to children who live in warmer areas. So that's content equivalence. We also need to make sure that the tests across the two languages have semantic equivalence. That is, the words that are used in one language and in the other language actually have the same meaning across the languages and even across distinct dialects within a given language. So if a test is testing a preposition, let's say the preposition out in the phrase take out something, out in Spanish may be translated as afuera, but in the take out something in Spanish we may use another verb like sacar. We will never use the preposition afuera. So if we are doing a translation like that without considering the characteristics of the two languages, we are not really working with items that have semantic equivalence. As you can see, this is related to translations. So it's important when you are doing a translation, let's say you do a translation of a questionnaire, you want to make sure that that the meaning is maintained across the two languages. Another consideration is about the structure of the tests. That is, the amount of subtests, the length of the subtests, the number of items. So the question you will answer is, how similar are the items, is the length, is the format of the measures across the two languages. There are certain published tests that, for example, developmental psychologists use that in English have, let's say, for the sake of an argument, let's say a subtest has 15 items, but in the Spanish version, that same subtest has 10 items. So that means that the two versions are not structurally consistent. And this issue is particularly important if a clinician or an evaluator is going to compare the results of the two tests. So the point here is that you have to compare apples with apples and oranges to oranges, right? If the English version and, let's say, the Spanish version are not equivalent, you cannot compare those results. In this regard, tests that are developed from a dual language perspective, that is, that are developed in English and in another language at the same time, are typically stronger, because from the beginning of the design of the test, the designers were thinking about the two languages. Another important issue is the standardization. That is, the sample, the population that was tested in order to come up with the norms. So we need to care about the sample in itself and also the procedures that were used to recruit that sample. So you may want to see, let's say, in a Spanish version of a test, is a standardization sample made out of monolingual Spanish speakers from another country? Those kids may not be comparable to the kids in the US. If they are children from the US, who are they? From where? We have talked about differences across Spanish dialects on the East Coast and the West Coast. We want to know that. If they decide to use only the Spanish, the home language dominant kids, how do they know they're dominant? Or are they mixing every kid, like kids with language attrition, without language attrition together? And of course, socioeconomic status. We know that on many occasions there is a correlation between socioeconomic status and language. Parental education, of course, is another important variable. So we need to look at that. So in addition to those cultural and linguistic appropriateness factors, we also need to pay attention to the technical equivalence across reliability and validity. We should answer this question: does the adapted or translated version have the similar reliability, the similar psychometrics, the similar validity than the original one? So on this table you can read the summary of the basic factors that we need to consider, the basic features. So we have basic psychometric features, cultural and linguistic features, and then we need to look at the technical equivalence across the measures. I will record one more little presentation for a few more important concepts. Thanks so much.